This is episode number 23 of Dev Branch Active Growth Problems.
I couldn't say
I'm
it.
Jason Tucker. You can find me at Jason Tucker on Twitter.
That's Jason Tucker. That's at Jason Tucker. There's Steve, but he's not here. That's
Steve
who I was
Zingit. You can go find him
thinking.
over at Zingy on Twitters.
Oh, hey, I'm Say at Say Read Media on Twitter for now, because, you know.
And y'all know who it is. It's your boy Jason Cosper, aka Fat Mullenweg, back at it again on the world's most influential WordPress podcast.
Speaking of podcasts, you can go find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Audible, Spotify, pretty much wherever it is you listen to podcasts. And if you want to come and hang out with us, you can go over to Discord. Go to wrcore.com/Discord, where you can go and hang out with everyone in there. We'd appreciate it.
I'll figure out how
Stays
to
even
use
in
it.
there.
I'll use it soon. I'm there
You
now,
can't
but
say
I
you use it soon. You installed it already. You're
I
good.
installed it, and I was like gonna reply, and then I couldn't figure out how to say hi to people, and then I was like, I'm out. Okay. Anyway, but we have two folks here. Are you guys in the Discord?
In your Discord?
Yeah, I mean you're in a
It's okay if you're
Discord.
not.
I'm sure you're in
We get
a Discord or two.
Sounds like I'm about to be.
25.
Yeah, hop in that Discord. It's cozy.
Cool.
We tend to keep the same informal atmosphere. And if you have a problem with the channels, it's this guy's fault. This one down here, the Cosby. Anyway, complain to him directly, please. So
Say,
our
set us
guests
up. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, our guests today are. Please introduce yourself. It's you.
John, who are you?
John, take the mic.
John Jacoby, work at Automotive on the research and development team.
You work at
doing
Automotive
some
now?
Yeah, I
I
do
don't
work
think I
at
knew that.
Automotive. They sponsor me for the Five to the Future initiative and work a lot on .org and security and WordPress core for 6.1 and review and keep an eye on some stuff and just try to generally be helpful. Also recently called a liar and a bunch of other not very nice names.
Usually
in the
thief
track
goes
ticket
along
we're
with
gonna
liar.
Talk about. Yeah.
Do they sponsor you to work on the meta team? That would be useful.
Yeah, pretty much whatever. Across the board, whatever we want to do.
Nice.
That's good to know. So you're the five for the future of Automotive.
One of five.
Yeah.
One of the five.
One of the five for the
Is
future.
there are actually a couple people. Yeah, five. Is it five? There are.
No,
there are a
it's
few.
5%. And
Five,
you know,
five people in the five. There are five people for the future. That's it. There are only
that's
five.
all
people.
it takes.
That's all it is.
All right, Matt. Who are you and what are you doing here?
You do have questions for me. That's great. Thank
I
you.
do. I'm starting right off the bat.
I'm Matt, and I work at Stellar WP and work on plugins there. We're hoping that they grow one day, but we'll never know for sure.
No, sad.
Wah, wah.
I'm so sorry that was loud, and I just moved my microphone here, so I apologize for the sound burst, spike.
Yeah, no, we do lots of things,
Tucker will
marketing
fix
and
it.
plugins and all that kind of stuff. Sorry, say it again.
So, given that heck of a segue, our topic today on Dev Branch, our Devier branch, is something that I saw happen in the Meta channel, because I'm in the Meta channel. It's really, more people have been coming in this past week that have been there lately, but it's an interesting place to hang out in the Make Slack. I've learned a lot. But I tweeted our WordPress or water cooler group chat, and I was like, I think this is going to be a thing. And then the next day I was like, okay, it's more of a thing. And then the next day I was like, yep, pure thing, definite thing happening here. But the thing that is happening is, in a nutshell, anyone who's listening to the show already knows, but just in case you just came home from Burning Man or something, a commit was done that actually pulled back, uncommitted, reversed. What's the word? Why can't I think of the word?
Reverted
a change that had been made.
Active install chart.
Yeah, a change had been made in a ticket from quite some time ago that created what is called an active growth install chart on the advanced tab of the plugins page. And what that does, just so we're all clear on what that does, or like, so I'm clear on what that does, is that just was a chart of all of the plugins that were checking back into the WordPress repository for an update check. Is that correct?
And then displayed it as a chart.
And then just that data was just being quantified and displayed as a chart. Yes. So how many an active install and that is, so what was not removed was the active installs number, which is a current number, which is on the front page of the plugins, still there because I checked. But the growth chart, which has cumulative data of that same number, I'm assuming, is no longer there. Is this accurate?
This is accurate.
Is there any
sounds good.
nuance I am missing there from the actual very just like baseline description of what is happening?
There's also a API endpoint that was also removed.
And that API endpoint allowed people to call that data.
Yeah.
And that data was refreshed every 24 hours. So in theory, every 24 hours, anyone could get that data on any plugin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Any
so totally
plugin.
open data plugin. So that's the thing. And then that that ticket that had created that was reverted. It's very suddenly, but when I say suddenly, all commits happen suddenly because they just happen instantly. But it happened without discussion, and I know that because I'm watching in meta, so I know it wasn't discussed before.
Mhm.
We're really talking about two really separate issues here. One issue is the active growth chart data and its need and or potential uses or problems. The other issue is a sudden change being made to the core well, it's not core WordPress, but the infrastructure of WordPress.org and the plugins repository without discussion / notice.
Yeah.
Correct? Two
Yeah,
separate
that's-
issues.
And,
Yep.
and
I think it's a
honestly,
good
the
summary.
discussion that did happen afterwards was also not so exemplary. So,
Right, but that's a second issue. So I really want to separate these two. And
A
if we
third
don't have
issue.
time to get to that second issue today, then that's okay, because that's something we could even talk about on Water Cooler itself. What I'd really like to focus, it's all Water Cooler, but like not on the Dev Branch version. So on Dev Branch here today, since we have the two of you, I know John, you were able to, because you have committer access, you're able to actually review the code that is not publicly available. Also correct? Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, well, we can get into the nuance. And then you were saying there are reasons for this. And Matt, you as a plugin owner in the past, and I don't know what your, developer, leader of plugins now. I don't know what we call you. But that
working on
plugin
it. Still doing
advocate, you have used that data. And so bringing you two on here, the intention is to discuss that from a technical perspective, understanding that. So either one of you can go first, whichever you prefer. And I think John, you've talked a lot in the you have a lot of documentation you've done in the track and in the Slack itself. So maybe Matt, you could summarize or maybe go off on a couple questions, which is that I've seen out there in general, which is, why is this so important to plugin developers that not the being taken away quickly, but just the actual data? What is the data used for?
Yeah. So one way I'll answer that is that I remember back in my day, like way back, there was no active install count. We had just downloads, and you would always be like checking out, oh, I got a bunch of downloads today. And then all of a sudden you saw plugin authors, especially larger ones that rhyme with toast, would put out a lot of releases in like 2 or 3 in a week or so. And you'd see their download numbers be really, really high. And that was really kind of a good test case for like, well, how many how many websites are actually using this plugin.
So wait, when they had those download numbers, was it using those cumulatively? So if someone downloaded a new version,
Just
with an update,
downloads.
it
It's
just
just
counted
downloads.
as a download?
It's just raw downloads. So if I
So that number
downloaded
would
it,
be essentially artificially inflated.
well, no, it's not. It still downloads. It is exactly what it is. It's how many times it was downloaded. I can download it 1,000 times, and I would do 1,000 of those numbers for
Not the
that
first
plugin.
download, not the second download. Just
Yeah.
all
Right.
downloads.
It doesn't.
How many like parentheses, like 4, 5,
Yeah.
6 do you
Yeah.
have of various plugins you've gone and downloaded?
No
I
one
have
will
a
ever
couple.
know. But
Like
but
17.
How many
might be
bots have
right.
you written that just had how many machines that were just downloading?
Yeah, it's like a
crazy.
wget and a while loop, and you're good to go, right?
it's like, wow, where did I get all these downloads? Don't turn that bot off. It's so that, and everybody, all the plugin authors just really were like, it's just downloads. Like, it's always going to jump when you do a release. It doesn't really mean anything. But at the same time, there was also commonly known that it is possible to figure out how many websites a plugin is on, but that .org wasn't sharing that at the time. And then suddenly they did.
Wait. When you say they weren't sharing it at the time, you're saying that .org has that information because it's part of, they were getting that feedback.
It's part of the way in which plugin updates work. So like in order for a website to say, hey, I need an update to this plugin, .org receives that information. So
even though the downloads weren't being displayed originally as separated out, .org still had the data, whether they were requesting a download that was fresh or a download that was being an update. So they had that data.
They have the number. They have the number of downloads regardless. Whether even if you go to the physical page and hit the download button, that's part of the downloads too. Whether you updated it in your admin, that's part of the downloads too. Whether you installed it for the first time, that's part of the downloads too. But the unique information is that they also have domains that hit .org saying, I need an update for this plugin, and that's the magic active install number. And then they did start saying, let's put active installs as a meaningful number for plugin growth. And at the end of the day, it becomes meaningful over time, more meaningful over time. One, because people start to see that number grow. It is also a search engine ranking factor in the WordPress.org plugin ranking. So when you search for donation, a lot of different plugins will show up, including PayPal and a couple others that aren't really donation plugins at all, but they show up high because they have a very high active install count. So those things start to be significant and matter on that front.
So real quick though, do you remember, either of you, or know when the active install growth, both the number and the chart, because I assume they came in at the same time, because why wouldn't you just put the number and the chart in at one time? No, I just distracted myself. Sorry. Carry on. I'll remember.
The number has been there for a while, but it's always been obfuscated. They've rounded it, or we've rounded it to hundreds, thousands, tens, 20, 100.
Yeah, it's like this one, 6,000 active installs kind of thing.
And then once it hits 1 million, it doesn't go up until you're past 2. So you could be anywhere between 1 and 2 and not know where you are.
I remember
that could be maybe not real great. And could probably be improved, but it's just how it's been.
When that data was added, do either of you know if the impact on the search, the plugin repository search, was like, I mean, it wouldn't be able to use that, data if it wasn't intentionally included in that. So I'm assuming that the search engine, the plugin repository search ranking, when did it start to use that feature? Do you know?
So the search algorithm and the way that plugins were weighted in the Elasticsearch index went through a bunch of iterations to try to come up with what eventually tested out to be what kind of felt right. You kind of tweak all the knobs and sliders, and you play with the weights to go like, okay, this sort of the results naturally are right, and that took a while. And it was mostly one person that worked on that, which was the same person that largely worked on Jetpack search, and so there was some experience from there. And I don't want to call people out because I don't know how comfortable they are with it. But long story short,
that is good information, though.
There was a really smart, super talented person that made it happen, and I think since that shipped, that has largely been untouched, and it's fine. I mean, it's
even
not,
with this change, right? Even with this change, that is still, so that active install number, whether or not that's active install or active install growth, that number in some fashion is still being used to affect the ranking in the plugins, even though the data is not available on the front end or API wise. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, it's interesting.
Yeah, I think, and part of the reason why I mention all of that in that context is that because the active install count it's not just a factor, it is one of the most important factors in the search ranking. Because of that, the way in which that number is created and represented is really significant. And so being able to jump, like when you're a smaller plugin, you go between, it goes from like tens to hundreds to thousands. And then once it gets to 10,000, like John said, it only goes 10 to 20, 20 to 30 to 50, all the way up to 100. And then it doesn't go again to 200. Between 100 and 200 is it's double of what you've done. Like I'm telling you this.
Yeah.
That's a rough climb right there.
Right now. Like it'll take us 4 years to get to 200, but at some point, like we got to be able to know, like, when is that going to happen? Do we have to know? Is it just a vanity metric? Not really, because we know that it impacts how we rank against other plugins.
So you still have your downloads data, right? And let me ask another question. And I've seen this around too, and I thought this was the case. Can you or can you not put in your free versions of the plugins that are coming from the repository, put in callbacks so that you could, in theory, get that data from the plugin without the WordPress data? Like if you enabled, like had that as a, yes, send us your stats, or you were talking about on the chat, Casper, about like Freemius, if you enable that. I don't know if you can do Freemius on the free plugins. I can't remember, but
you can.
Like those are additional ways to get that data,
opt-in.
right?
But that's
opt-in.
But it's
All
opt-in. So it's not,
You can do Freemius. Yeah, you can do Freemius on a free plugin as long as it's opt-in. That's the thing with telemetry, at least in the WordPress repository. You have to basically have your users opt in to that data, so you are effectively losing the segment of people who a brand new MacBook showed up for my wife Sarah this morning, and it asked, hey, do you want to send telemetry data back to Apple? And she goes, why the hell would I want to do that? Like, I literally don't want anything to leak back to Apple on what I'm doing on my machine. So she unchecked it. And now she opted out. And that data now is not getting sent back. Like, there are privacy.
MacBooks are going to get worse over time with certain.
But
so is your refrigerator and
even though
your
she's opted
thermometer
out of telemetry, she is still going to get software updates.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. So the thing
Wink, wink.
is that when you go to remove Freemius, it even asks you, which we all pick the second to last one, which is like, I'm temporarily disabling this plugin. Leave me alone. I don't care if I'm ever coming back or not, and you don't need to know if I'm coming back or not. But it's going to ask you those sorts of things. So I don't know, it's not good enough. I don't think that type of data
not good
is
enough.
good.
You're saying,
Yeah, I don't think it's good enough, especially if you're going to have a marketplace where you're going to be able to download a plugin for free and use it. Then you need to have more data for it, which is it's kind of crazy that we don't have that much data, because, for instance, like podcasts have statistics that are tied to them, and you can see the download statistics, the subscriber statistics. You can do all of that stuff just by going into like the Apple Connect for podcasts, and you can do one for Spotify. You can do one for all those things. I don't know. I just think that like having that plugin repository needs to have a little bit more data if that's the official place where you can get this. And if you're a developer on iPhone or on Mac and you're going to be putting a thing in the App Store, you get that data and you can see how many people are downloading the thing.
I have, so on that, I agree. So now we talked about, stats, useful, important, whatever, which I guess we all kind of know that in a way. But so John, you've looked at the code, right? And you were talking about this in the Slack, and you have that privilege of having that access because of your status in the project in terms of being a core committer and what you've worked on. So without telling us, what I have been trying to figure out what exactly is so possibly vulnerable. The only thing that basically something that Matt said, where it says it's sending the domain name back, like, and the domain, it's logging the domain names of where it is. So the domain name then could be, in theory, scraped. Like, I was like, maybe that's what's so vulnerable about the data. But like, what is, like, okay, not what is so vulnerable about the data, but like, is it personal is it PID, personally identification, and what is that? I don't know.
Identifiable information.
Yeah,
I get what you're saying.
Is it, or is it like, is it the domain name? So it's something like that's like kind of bad, or is it like, no, like there's no credit card data on here. It's not like there's a credit card tied to this. So why would what could be so bad? In theory, hypothetically.
What gives?
Well, so that's the interesting thing about watching everyone talk about it and speculate on it is that when you don't know what happened, your brain goes crazy. You actually start like really going down the rabbit hole. When my car got stolen in Miami and I didn't know who stole it, man, did I cook up a bunch of theories about how they did it, where they took it, and it showed up a day and a half later stripped, which you knew was going to happen. But like, man, for that day, I was making up crazy stories about
I would like to submit as my own personal conspiracy theory. I don't believe this one, but that it is in order to hide the data on the Gutenberg plugin.
Oh, no, it's not that.
I know it's not. So I hadn't seen that one, but that was the I decided to come up with that.
When I say crazy, I am
the Ark of the Covenant.
I don't want it. I'm not trying to be like dismissive or anybody. I'm really genuinely just like having experienced it myself. I know that that's what happens.
Yeah. Okay. So we do, but we don't have that information.
Conspiracy theorists love a vacuum.
When it's privacy.
I don't want to get into that second issue of communication or whatever. Let's you don't have to say what the security vulnerability is. Could you describe something that is what is
I will eventually.
An analogy.
I will. I definitely will. The thing is, one of the sort of tenets of having access to the data or the code or the things that are the inner workings of a thing is, one, you don't usually say that you have access to those things because you're instantly a target, right? And so there are people that have access to those things that through whatever means that they have access to, they do. We have to. The systems teams, people that have worked on stats, people that work on .org, people that commit, people that not just commit to core, but that commit to the websites, that commit to track, that commit to maintaining. And tons, right? There is a significant number of people that have access to things, and
sometimes
because there is so much data
by the freeness with which credentials are rented out.
There's so much data on WordPress.org that you folks, lots of people probably have some level of access that they do not know that they might have access to, and depending on what you work on, it also determines what you end up being able to see. And so having worked on WordPress.org, WordCamp, the BuddyPress, BBPress sites, track, having like over time, I have myself earned an ability to have some access to some of the stuff. And so when,
got the keys.
When like across from working from different companies and different pieces of it, that when I saw this happen, and I think we all went like, maybe
That's
is
weird.
out of the ordinary. This is like a unique occurrence.
It was abrupt.
And yes. And so when I saw it, I was like, well, let me look and see what was not obfuscated the way that it was intended to be. And because if any time that you look at security releases for WordPress core, you will look at the commit message and they're like, well, that's not super useful, but that's the point, is that it's supposed to be truthful and honest without giving everyone away what the problem
What
was.
did you see? I'm dying.
Right. And so
it's like going through the King Tut's tomb.
There are two pieces of it. One, the obfuscation part is exactly only what you think that it is. It is only about the raw number being like reverse calculated in a way that was accurate enough to completely defeat the purpose of obfuscating it in the first place. And so if WordPress.org is going to have an API endpoint that is going to go through all the work of hiding the real number, and then you can just get the real number anyways, then we should rethink what it is that we're trying to do.
This is literally about the
integer, there's that part
as opposed to the generalization of the chunks.
So there's that one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that there, in my opinion, and this is the part that I've got to put on track yet. The other part of it is that this endpoint and another separate endpoint that are still live right now are just PHP files. They are not endpoints that map to some other thing, that do something else that's clever or fun. Like, these are just PHP files that load in HyperDB, that access the database, that give you JSON. They are as simple of an interface into the stats data as you literally could possibly code to get it done. There's no query caching, there's no object caching. That is just, you're hitting the data and getting what you want. And some people were people poke at what they see in terms of the parameters it accepts, the slug, the limit, whatever. People see what it is and they go, let me see if I can get more out of it. Let me see what I can pass into these parameters and see how it works, because they don't have access to what I see, but they do have access to the endpoint and they can see what comes out. And so people experiment to see what's the most amount of data that they can get out of it. And ultimately, what you could eventually, first part is about a year ago, it started spitting out errors because people were shoving a bunch of data at it that was not right. And it was causing debug notices, PHP errors were coming through the logs. And so it got updated to correct some of those issues to prevent people from brute forcing it in specific ways that weren't leaking data, but that were causing the error logs on WordPress.org to fill up like crazy. So fix that problem. In doing that, meant that it was returning different headers based on the errors that were happening. And so depending on what
this is all reverse hacking.
Depending on what you sent to that endpoint, you could get a different header back to determine whether or not a plugin existed, whether or not that plugin had any installs, whether or not a plugin.
It's like the true or false game that you have to play, like
essentially,
true or false questions.
So when people start pen testing, they are just looking for ways in that any amount of data that is returned, that is a gleanful insight, is a security problem. It is unintended behavior for that endpoint to work that way. And so there is the obfuscation part of it. That is true. But when people are able to determine a plugin existing or not existing, or an install count being 0 or not 0, that is not intended to be how that endpoint works. It is leaking unintended data and responses that it shouldn't be leaking. And so it is not serious in terms of like all of WordPress.org got hacked and everything was MySQL injected and everything. Like, when people hear security, they think something was breached.
They think personal identification data. That's what we think.
That was not implied. That was not anything I said. That was not anything anybody else said.
No, that's
Otto,
conditional.
I know Otto just said it's not a secret, but
That's
it's not necessarily
cultural
about
conditioning. That's what that is.
Yes.
We hear security breach and everyone's like, where's my wallet number? I have to call people and cancel stuff, So that's,
yes.
I think that's
Right.
it's a fair
But nobody
reaction.
said security breach.
I mean,
people speculated that it was a security breach.
Yeah.
People speculate that
I think
Matt
people
wants to hoard the
speculate.
data. People
Totally.
speculate that there is more data available than there is. All these things are, these are choices. These are decisions that people are making to have it's one thing if you want to have a conversation, around with your friends about what you think this is. But when it becomes a fact or it becomes evidence to support that someone is acting in bad faith, that is a different problem for a different show.
Yeah, that's next week. We can talk about it.
In this morning's post-status expert, Nye said something really interesting, which is like basically in the absence of any sort of reasoning for this. And I understand if there are particular security issues, like you do kind of have to be quiet until the security issues get fixed. But in the absence of a reason or a narrative, people just come up with their own.
Yeah.
So, but I think it needs to be said. It needs to be said really clearly. We're not talking about the communication stuff, but there is a way to communicate why something is taken down without inviting crazy speculation.
Right.
There is a way to communicate that without inviting speculation.
The issue of the data, like I said, one thing, and that's a technical issue. The issue of the community impact of that decision is exponentially more damaging, in my opinion, than having that data available. And I think we should just talk about this next week because there's so much to talk about there. I have one quick technical question for you, which maybe you can't answer, John, but maybe you can. Does the scraped data have that data in it, like the stuff that people have already called from the API, like that data? There's no like real vulnerability there other than people can crunch those numbers and come up with information, right?
Correct. Right. There's nothing in the JSON that was
sensitive or
correct, not sensitive. Right. It's just numbers that can be used for whatever purposes, and that's
and they were being used for all of those purposes.
Oh, I'm sure, because all the big corporations have money to pay people to crunch numbers.
Well, the endpoint, all the endpoint returned was percentages. The endpoint just returned like the obfuscated dates and with numbers that were intentionally not exact.
Yeah, so like two big places do it very officially, WP Metrics and Rank Math. They both were pulling from that API daily. And what they would do is they actually, Rank Math is a product that people pay for, I pay for.
Same.
And it's owned by Automotive. And it's actually like what they have a way of essentially doing math to figure out what your actual active install count is.
But now they can't do that because they don't have that data anymore.
And now they can't do that, correct?
How interesting.
Yeah.
Does that make the product irrelevant? I have so many more questions. Oh well.
Yeah.
Ask them on Twitter or in the
Discord. Makes me wonder if we could double down on providing more information to developers or not, or if they're going to continue to just have to use opted in third party to do it.
Well, that was one of the reasons why. I mean, I know that we're going over, but are we officially going over our time?
We're going over.
We're going over for the first time here.
Woo, we needed Otto on here too, honestly.
Shout out to Otto. What up, Otto?
Yeah, of course their math was wrong. They got obfuscated data to deal with. Of course.
I mean, it's fuzzy logic for a reason.
Yeah.
That's funny.
And so, like the reason that the data gets processed every 24 hours, and this is, I think, an important sort of distinction for folks to have, is that when the data comes in from an update check from WordPress.org, and it looks at api.wordpress.org to say, is there a version of WordPress available, or plugin updates available, or theme updates available? When WordPress makes that request, when everyone's WordPress site makes their outbound request to api.wordpress.org, it sends along with the data that everyone can look at and see. It's in the code, it's all that stuff. But once it hits the endpoint, it sort of gets broken apart in a way that the intention of is so that it is not easy for people like me to reverse engineer that data,
Right.
to try and figure out who is who, or what is what, or where is where. Everything gets broken apart into very separate database tables or servers to obfuscate it in a way that a collective of any of it is not easy. And so the query that happens to essentially bulk collect and aggregate that data goes to a separate database table every night. It does a big bunch of temporary queries and subqueries to get a bunch of data for all the plugins, and then puts that data in a temp table, and then that happens nightly because it's just not stored in a way to make it easy to pull that data back out. And so anytime that there is something that we do choose as a community that we want to report on, or that is worth showing on a plugin screen, it's not a simple, super straightforward thing that we just do when we look at the data and go. Someone has to come up with the right way to get the right data and serve that, with an endpoint that does exactly what it is intended to do. And there were, like I said in the track ticket, but on the dev side of it, there was hesitance to show precise numbers there, not just in terms of like calculation and the code and the data, but whether or not it was healthy mentally to focus on that extra data. And was that the data that was the most important one to show? And frankly, in my own opinion, which I know I've said already, is like removing it now. Removing it and having everyone be upset about it. Yes, it's important. Yes, everyone relied on it. Yes, it's a really super important metric in general. I get that. There's way cooler data. There's way cooler stuff that we could show, that we could see. But what it proves to me is that once it's there, removing it is really hard.
Yeah.
It's
So
always
whatever
harder
we
to
do,
take information away from someone than it is if once you've given it.
We already have so
can't-
little information to begin with, and we
Yeah.
actually are asking for more all the time, and the little that's actually actionable is now gone.
So
So
whatever we do add next,
so
whatever
we
the
don't wanna
data
get
is that we
into-
show.
Okay, but we don't want to get
is
into the next that topic of like the communication part, but basically this is where that bridges, because if you just remove all of the communication requests and needs, Matt Mullenweg, Matt's response to everyone, which is like, what data do you need, which we talked about at the top of the show, right, actually makes sense within the context of understanding what the problem was. But without the context of understanding what the problem was and what was actually taken away, what data was possibly the problem, without that context, it looks like it's just completely ignoring what everyone is saying. So that is, again, this is why it's two separate things, because on the pure data side, the pure technical side, there is, this was a problem, it was dealt with, and then if we want that data to be returned, we can talk about what data we want back, right? Totally fine, not a problem. Well, but turns out people are human beings and need that reasoning, need that understanding. And that part is impacting the technical explanation. And it is itself obfuscating. That's for you, Marcus. Is it itself obfuscating the response and the actual solution, which in theory is actually positive, which is like, okay, what data do you want? Let's find out a way to get that data in a way that doesn't compromise whatever it is this is here. So,
John, would it be extremely difficult to just patch what's going on so that it could be properly obfuscated again. Because it would be wonderful if that would have been the communication as well, to say, hey, we found an issue that is that some of this data is being misused in one way or another. We're going to patch it and bring the active install chart back again. But because that wasn't the way it was communicated, it feels instead like we don't like this data in the first place. So,
right. So I just want to, so technically, I think we've got a really good understanding of that. And that makes sense from a moving forward on the track ticket. If there are technical ideas about how that data conversation, whatever, that can happen on that track ticket. And then next week, we can get into the conversation, which is my favorite part, about, leadership and community and the work way. And communication and all those soft things that developers aren't.
Are you trying to say that you're in? Are you trying to say you're inviting me back next week? Is that what you're trying to say?
If you want to talk about this, then sure, absolutely. We could just have the same conversation from that perspective. So,
cool.
Yeah, we went over 10 minutes. This is like a first.
I know. My fingers on the outro button right now.
Jason's like freaking out. He's like, I gotta go. Bye.
Eject.
All right, folks. Thanks for hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. Talk to you later.
Bastard.
All right, 10 minutes over. Go over to wpwatercore.com/subscribe to subscribe to this content. We would really appreciate that. We're available on all the major podcasting places. Go find us if you want to listen to us as a podcast. If you want to watch us, you can go over to YouTube. You can go over to Twitter.
You get bonuses with the watch version.
Us on Facebook. Talk to you later. You have a good one. Bye-bye.
You should watch us because we're funny looking.